Ever since the Edward Snowden revelations, there has been this idea that everyone is watched. Our phone calls are logged, our every move online is tracked, and there's some truth to that. But everyone may be watched, but everyone is not watched equally or in the same way. And this panel is about that reality. What do I mean by that? Historically, minorities in this country, racial and ethnic minorities, immigrants, religious minorities, have been the targets of a disproportionate level of government surveillance, not just for law enforcement, but also national security. To take one case in point, if you can name an African-American civil rights leader of the 20th century, chances are strong that he or she was surveilled by the American government, not for law enforcement, but in the name of national security. W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey in the early 20th century were surveilled by an actual branch of the American military called the Negro Subversion Division of the Military Intelligence Division of Military Intelligence. And they were surveilled because there was a worry that African-American servicemen returning from World War I would in fact be closet Bolsheviks intent on revolution in this country. If you fast forward to the Civil Rights Movement, a lot of people know Martin Luther King was surveilled by the FBI, but it wasn't just Martin Luther King. It was Fannie Lou Hamer, Whitney Young, even Muhammad Ali that were surveilled. And they weren't just surveilled, in the case of Martin Luther King and Muhammad Ali, by the FBI. They were surveilled by the NSA. And the irony of this disclosure is that this was disclosed not years ago, not decades ago, but 3 months after the Edward Snowden disclosures. Martin Luther King and Muhammad Ali were surveilled at the request, in a program that was created by NSA at the request of Lyndon Baines Johnson, to see if domestic civil rights activists were in fact in contact with the Soviet Union. Spoiler alert, they were not. If you fast forward to today, members of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Movement for Black Lives, there have been repeated reports from the Associated Press, from The Intercept, from many press outlets in between, that they too are subject to a disproportionate level and nature of surveillance. And so the low-tech surveillance of the early 20th century and the old-tech, I guess you could call it, surveillance of the civil rights movement, that is, and the disproportionate nature of that surveillance survives today with high-tech surveillance. And again, it is not just targeting, but frequently these surveillance techniques actually work differently on minority populations for a variety of different reasons. So today, we are going to talk about that. We have a wonderful panel to do so. Chinyere Tutashinda is running a little late. She'll join us shortly. But I think it's particularly great that we're doing this in the House of Representatives, because I will say one thing. Surveillance reform after the USA Freedom Act that passed recently, if you look at the debate around that bill, there was some awareness in the Senate from folks like Senator Rand Paul, Senator Patrick Leahy, that there was a disproportionate targeting of surveillance on certain communities, particularly communities of color. But it was really in the House that this discussion actually took on some speed and some urgency. It never sort of rose to the fore, but it was an active source of debate. So I'm very glad to have this conversation with you all today. I want to begin. How we'll proceed is we'll proceed in the following way. Professor Xi will speak for about 10 minutes on how he was personally profoundly affected by this disparate impact of and disparate nature of surveillance. He will tell us his story and what he thinks we should learn from it. And then we will turn to my colleagues Harlan and Sakira, and then I will close. I will put on my panelist hat to talk about different aspects of this, and we'll speak for about 5 minutes. I will try to keep close tabs on time to ensure that we can have a conversation and a Q&A about all of this. So without further ado, let me turn it over to my colleague, Professor Xi. Thank you, Professor Bedoya. 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 Thank you, Prof
Thank you, Professor Bedoya. And it's a great honor for me to participate in this panel on the bias in the government surveillance. I was an innocent target of government surveillance, and as such, I laud the Fourth Amendment caucus for working to protect our constitutional rights, and I want to add my support by telling you my story. It was May 21, 2015, and I was wakened by loud knocks on my door, and it was so urgent that I opened the door without even fully dressed. Many people were outside of my house. Some were armed, and some had a battering ram ready to take down my door. An FBI agent announced my arrest, and another put the handcuffs on me. So the armed agents burst into my house, running about and running up my wife and two daughters. One by one, they walk out of their bedrooms at gunpoint with their hands raised. I had no idea why this was happening, and I was worried how threatening this must be to my wife and daughters. And my younger daughter was only 12 years old. But I couldn't have worked with them. As the FBI agents took me out of my house, I had no idea when I would see them again. I grew up during Cultural Revolution in China, and it was not unusual then that people got taken away and could not see their family for a long time. At the FBI headquarters, I was subjected to DNA sampling, mugshot, fingerprinting, and interrogation. Later, at the U.S. Marshal Service, I was ordered to strip naked and bend over against the wall so that a U.S. Marshal could check whether I hid anything in my body. At the end of the 2 hours interrogation, the FBI agents told me that I was charged for having made a pocket heater covered by a non-disclosure agreement with a U.S. company for a Chinese collaborator. And I said, that's absurd. The fact is that I had never shared the pocket heater information with anybody in China. So I couldn't believe how they could charge me using these techniques that's for violent criminals and designed to inflict maximum psychological damage to me and my family with not a thread of truth in their acquisition. So there were 4 counts in the indictment against me based on 4 emails that I sent from my Temple University address to colleagues in China. None of the emails talked about the pocket heater. They were about things entirely different from the pocket heater. So a heater is what we use to make a heat substrate when we make thin film materials, much like using a stove to cook. The pocket heater is a kind of a heater invented and patented by a company in Germany in the 1990s, and the US company modified it for its own purpose. It is not classified, not sensitive, but rather well known publicly. And I'm not aware of any economic value it has to the US company. And I don't know why the federal government should even care about it. The FBI agents did ask me a lot of questions about my academic collaborations with Chinese colleagues. But this is what the US government and the universities encourage us to do. They are for advancing sciences, for publications, and never for financial gain. And in my research, I have never done anything involving sensitive, classified, or protected information, or export control technologies. So I was very fortunate to have engaged a team of great lawyers. And leading expert in my research field wrote affidavits to affirm that I had never shared the pocket heater technology with China. The author of one affidavit said that I'm very familiar with the pocket heater as I was one of the co-inventors. Armed with these affidavits, my lawyers gave a presentation to the government and made a request that find your own expert and ask if there's any evidence that Professor Xi shared the pocket heater information with people in China. We also shared a motion to dismiss the indictment that we were ready to file with the court, with the government. On September 11, 2015, the deadline date, the court ordered us to file our motion. The government dismissed the case, citing additional information came to the attention of the government. So when the case was dropped, and I told the New York Times reporter that the government should not have charged me without first checking with the expert. I said, this is not a joke. This is not a game. Imagine that one day I was a respected researcher and department chair and enjoy family time just like any ordinary American family. Overnight, I was painted as a Chinese spy all over the news and the internet, and faced up to 80 years in prison and a $1 million fine. Friends and colleagues stopped talking to us, and I could not talk to my students. We were constantly concerned about the FBI surveillance and even our personal safety. This sudden strike was enough to crush anybody, but even worse, the stress day in, day out, as time wore on, would accumulate and become almost unbearable. In addition, we didn't know how we would pay for the mounting legal fee if the case dragged on. We were constantly consumed by outrage and anguish, defiance and scares, a nightmare that I do not wish any innocent American to go through. So it's been more than a year since my case was dismissed. But our struggle is far from over. We know that the FBI had all my emails. We know that they listened to my phone calls. We know that FISA was used, a federal law which authorized the collection of foreign intelligence information between foreign powers and agents of foreign powers. And we know that I was surveilled. What we don't know is why. What was the probable cause for the government to spend so much taxpayers' money to target someone who had done nothing wrong? Once our rights was violated like this, our peace of mind was gone forever. We are now living under constant concern that the government is still trying to, as the Chinese saying puts it, pick bones out of an egg and charge me for something. So did I become a target of the federal government because I collaborated with colleagues in China? But I was doing what the government asked us to do. According to the Department of State, science and technology cooperation with China accelerated scientific progress in the United States, providing significant direct benefit to a range of U.S. technical agencies. For example, the Department of Energy and the U.S. Air Force have actively pursued collaborations with Chinese scientists on superconductivity for years. In fact, my National Science Foundation grant required me to exchange samples with colleagues in China. If scientists stop collaborating with foreign colleagues for fear of prosecution, and if talents around the world stop coming to America, the damage to our nation's interest will be substantial. Was the probable cause related to my Chinese ethnic origin, to my visits of my aging mother, my siblings, and my friends in China? My lawyer, Peter Zeidenberg, has asked, if he was Canadian-American or French-American, or he was from the UK, would this have ever even got on the government's radar? I don't think so. What's alarming is that mine is not the only such case. There was National Weather Service hydrologist Sherry Chan, and there were Eli Lilly biologists Guoqing Cao and Shui Li. There is a pattern that scientists of Chinese origin being charged only for the charges to be dropped. This has prompted members of the U.S. Congress, and like the members of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and many other members, and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and many Asian American civil rights groups to ask the Department of Justice to investigate whether race, ethnicity, or national origin had played any role in these cases. If race-based persecution and prosecution exists for any ethnic groups of Americans, such practices infringe on the constitutional rights of due process and equal protection of American citizens. Supreme Court Associate Justice Louis Brandeis once said, "The greatest danger to liberty lurk in the insidious encroachment by men of zeal, well-meaning but without understanding." Cases like mine do not advance the cause of fighting economic espionage and protecting our intellectual properties. They undermine people's confidence in America's legal system, and they terrorize the Asian American community and scientific community. They endanger the liberty we cherish so much in this country. The work of the Fourth Amendment Caucus is important in the fight to prevent the tragedy that happened to me from happening again to other innocent Americans. And I thank you wholeheartedly for your effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Xi. So first I'd like to welcome Chinyere Tutashinda from the Center for Media Justice to join me to my right. We will now proceed to Harlan Yu, and after Harlan to Sakira Cook, if that's all right with you, Sakira, unless you think it's worthwhile for me to discuss face recognition beforehand. Okay. We'll turn to Harlan. I will put my panelist hat on and talk about face recognition technology. We'll turn to Sakira, and then we will turn to Chinyere. And each of us will speak for a maximum of 5 minutes, and the super bonus prize is if you speak for less. We have two things going. We have one thing going for us and one thing going against us. The thing going for us is that we have an amazing panel. The thing against us is that large panels tend to be deeply, deeply boring. And so I don't think we're too at risk of that, but if we keep it short, we can keep the conversation going. Let me turn with that to Harlan. Harlan Yu of Upturn, who will speak about police body-worn cameras and the broader implications.
Thanks, Alvaro, and thanks also, Professor Xi, for sharing your harrowing experience with us. I want to look at disparate impact of surveillance from a slightly different angle, and that's of street-level policing, and in particular about body-worn cameras and the impact it's having on our communities. So it's probably not a surprise to many of you in this room that the adoption of body-worn cameras has been one of the biggest changes in policing technology over the past 2 years, especially after Ferguson. Almost all major police departments in the country have adopted or are piloting body-worn camera programs. In a few years, body-worn cameras will basically be standard gear for any police officer, just in the way that guns and bulletproof vests and handcuffs are already today. And so the promise of body-worn cameras is that we'll see an increase in transparency and accountability in our community police relations. But since the rise of adoption, that's not what we've been seeing so far for the large part. My organization, Upturn, along with Sakira at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, we've been doing a bunch of research looking at the body-worn camera policies being adopted in the 50 largest cities in the country. And what we found so far is that there's been this nationwide failure to provide footage to the public in high-profile incidents, and also a failure to protect the civil rights of individuals that are being recorded by these cameras. And so civil rights groups from the start have been pointing out these concerns. Contrary to the popular narrative, many of the civil rights groups and social justice groups that I work with don't see body-worn cameras as a productive or a useful reform, and certainly not a substitute for broader police reforms that are necessary. So in May of 2015, a major coalition of 34 civil rights, media rights, and privacy groups that span from the NAACP to Million Hoodies, from the ACLU to grassroots racial justice groups like Chinyere's Center for Media Justice, prominently pointed out in a set of shared civil rights principles on body-worn cameras. And I'll just quote for a second. that cameras could be used to intensify disproportionate surveillance and enforcement in heavily policed communities of color. And without carefully crafted policy safeguards in place, there's a real risk that these new technologies, these new devices, could become instruments of injustice rather than tools for accountability. And so what's the problem here? Cameras are a powerful technology. They're technologies for control. Body-worn cameras are owned and operated by the police. They're worn by officers, and they're worn by officers in a way such that they point out at the community recording individuals rather than pointing inward at police officers, recording what police officers are actually doing. And the resulting footage, the thousands of hours of footage that's being captured, are also owned and controlled by the police. And so in effect, what body-worn cameras can be seen as is essentially a roaming surveillance system. And because cameras are worn on the body of police officers, this surveillance system is concentrated in already over-policed communities. And it mirrors and intensifies the existing racial biases and disparities that we already have on our front-end policing system, which of course has ripple effects across the rest of our justice system. And so police departments see body-worn cameras as a system to, not only provide some measure of transparency in some cases, and we've seen some nuggets of that, but in large part, the allure of body-worn cameras is also as an evidence collection mechanism, where body-worn cameras can better document the interactions that they're having to collect evidence of crimes that are occurring in communities, and sharing that with prosecutors to make it even easier to continue to prosecute our already over-incarcerated communities. I'll just leave with one final note, especially for this audience in the House of Representatives, which is that the federal government is providing substantial funding to state and local law enforcement agencies to adopt and expand their body-worn camera programs. The Department of Justice, its Bureau of Justice Assistance, has given $20 million of grants to local police departments in each of the last 2 years. Part of their goal, their stated goal, is to increase transparency and accountability in police interactions. But the problem is that the Bureau of Justice Assistance is unwilling to put any proactive policies in place in terms of what grantees, the safeguards that grantees need to put in place as they're using federal funds. So I think this is an opportunity for Congress to potentially step in and ensure that the federal funding that's being used to fund body-worn cameras across the country is being used in a way that benefits the community. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Harlan. I'm going to talk for a few minutes on face recognition technology, police face recognition technology, and I want to start with a few hypotheticals. I want you to imagine that there is a bank robbery, and a surveillance camera picks up the face of the robber. And police use face recognition technology to compare that face to mugshots from that state. And for each of these hypotheticals, I want you to think, are you okay with this? Are you comfortable with this? So, are you comfortable with that? And I think a lot of people in this room would say, yeah, I am. What if instead of comparing that robber's face, they compared it to mugshots, they compared it to the driver's license of every single person in that state? And in this way, half of all Americans have their faces scanned, and they aren't told about it. Are you okay with that? What if instead of taking a photo of a bank robber, the police take a photo of a person standing in a protest or a person standing in a parking lot somewhere and use face recognition to identify them? Are you okay with that? What if all of this is done without warrants, without court oversight, without accuracy tests, with few audits, and with little transparency? Are you okay with that? And finally, what if the technology was found to be less accurate on precisely the group of people on which it is most used? Are you okay with that? So maybe all of you saw this coming, but these are not hypotheticals. This is real life, and it is happening today. It's the subject of a report that my center, the Center on Privacy and Technology, released about a month ago called The Perpetual Lineup. Copies of it are over on that table. I see a few copies there, www.perpetuallineup.org. I want to dwell on that last aspect of the hypothetical, of these real life case scenarios, because the little research that has been done on the differential accuracy rates of face recognition suggests that it is less accurate on African Americans, women, and young people at a rate of 5 to 10%. And this isn't some kind of fringe study. This is a study co-authored by one of the FBI's leading experts and by two of the leading face recognition experts in the nation, a 2012 study. And what does that mean? In some systems, it means that when you run a face of a woman's face, search of a woman's face as opposed to a man's face, you're less likely to find the culprit for the woman's face. And in some systems, it just says, sorry, we didn't find the person you're looking for. But other systems are not designed to say no. Other systems will, no matter what, return to you a list of candidate photos. And so when you're searching for an African American's face as opposed to a white person's face, a woman's face as opposed to a man's face, or a young person's face as opposed to an older person's face, in these systems that aren't designed to give you a no for an answer, you are more likely to get, in return to that search, faces of innocent people. And the problem here that is layered on top of this is that these systems don't just work differently for African Americans, they're also disproportionately more likely to be used to identify them, to be used on them, and African Americans are disproportionately likely to be in the database for the jurisdictions that rely on mugshot photos as their databases. And so police face recognition technology may be least accurate for the population on which it is most likely to be used. And I think it's really important, zooming out for a moment, to realize that technology isn't neutral. Technology is just as biased as us humans. And face recognition is just one example of that. So if you want to read further about our work, I refer to you our report. And I refer to you with one, I'll close with one final anecdote from a report. Claire Garvey, Claire, I don't know if you could raise your hand, wonderful, my co-author. She and our staff, we read like 17,000 pages of FOIA documents. And one of the things we saw is how police departments talk to the public about their systems. And so we found this key document on page 53 of the report. And it was a Q&A that the police department was using for its, the Seattle Police Department was using for its system. And it says, is the booking photo comparison system biased against minorities? And the answer in this FAQ is no. It does not see race, sex, orientation, or age. The software is matching distance and patterns only, not skin color, age, or sex of an individual. Which is a really weird thing to say about software that's designed to look at faces. And is also simply not backed by the vast majority of research that's been done on this subject. So bias in face recognition is, from all signs suggest, a real problem, and people aren't doing enough to fix it. Our report has a model piece of legislation at the back of it that a member of Congress could introduce or a state legislator could introduce. It also has recommendations for the National Institute for Standards and Technology and the FBI that could be brought about by simple oversight actions by members of the House of Representatives. I'll leave it at that and turn to Sakira from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights.
Thanks, Alvaro. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I don't know if this thing is working. But my name is Sakira. I'm a counsel at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. For those of you who don't know who we are a coalition of about 200 national organizations. Our members range from the NAACP, the ACLU, to the National Women's Law Center, the United Methodist Church, AARP. So a very broad, very diverse set of constituencies that our coalition represents. I am not a technologist or a privacy expert, but I do work in the area of the criminal justice system and reform of the criminal justice system. And my work looks at our justice system along its continuum. So law enforcement, sentencing reforms, and reentry. And why I come to this issue, or how I come to this issue, is that the Leadership Conference, since I would say probably the very beginning, has long worked on an issue of profiling in the justice system. And for those of you who don't know, when I refer to profiling, this is the discriminatory practice by law enforcement officials to target individuals for suspicion who are of a certain race, ethnicity, or national origin, suspicion of a crime, who are of a certain race, ethnicity, or national origin, absent some suspect-specific characteristic, right? So they're only using their race, their national origin, or ethnicity to target them for suspicion of a crime. So Professor Xi's situation here, where he was targeted probably based on his national origin for some crime, and that didn't seem to be a crime at the time. So that is what we do. And the premise behind profiling is that it's based on an assumption that certain particular individuals of particular races, national origins, or ethnicity are more prone to criminal behavior than other individuals of different races, ethnicities, or national origin. And profiling happens in a couple of different ways. It's street-level profiling, which many of you may have heard of, called in the 1990s and up until today, which is basically driving while black, this phenomena of driving while black, where African-American motorists reported being stopped at disproportionate rates than their white counterparts, and this still continues to today. Or at the street level, stop and frisk, where in New York a couple of years ago we heard about NYPD particularly targeting African American and Latino young people to stop them on the street and search them for illegal contraband. It also happens post 9/11 in the counterterrorism aspect. And again, this is not anything new. As Alvaro mentioned, this has been going on. Profiling of communities of color has been going on, I would say, since the beginning of the United States, but probably early 20th century and early civil rights movement. Not just Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, but also the Black Panthers. And there was a program by the FBI called COINTELPRO to infiltrate and to surveil the Black Panther movement. So this continues today. In the counterterrorism after 9/11, it is really based on or focused on Muslims, Arabs, Asians, and the surveillance of mosques and other places of worship, based on the assumption that people from certain countries or of certain faiths will have some connection to terrorism in some way, shape, or form. And then finally, in the immigration context, where undocumented individuals are often stopped and asked to show their papers, like we've heard was happening in Maricopa County in Arizona. So that sort of lays the foundation for how law enforcement already interacts and surveils communities of color, just using basic tools. And now we have surveillance technology, whether it's body cameras, whether it's facial recognition software, or some other type of predictive analytic that can be used to supercharge the discrimination that we are already seeing through basic law enforcement practices like profiling, like stop and frisk, and like broken windows policing. So from our perspective, it's high-tech profiling, and it's really a concern for our communities that we are already concerned about as it relates to street level and counterterrorism and immigration profiling, but also now that we have these other technologies that things can happen from far away, and it isn't an interaction with a particular law enforcement individual that we can document and see, we don't know who or what is happening at the time. So over the last several years, the Leadership Conference has engaged in a process of looking at the intersection between big data and surveillance technologies and civil rights and the criminal justice system in particular. And we came up with a set of principles that I'll just read off, but you can find them in more detail on our website, civilrights.org. But they're civil rights principles for the era of big data. And there are 5 principles: stop high-tech profiling, ensure fairness in automated decisions, and this has to do with predictive analytics that are being used in sentencing and bail decisions, preserve constitutional principles. Obviously, the Fourth Amendment still exists, and we should uphold that. Enhance individual control of personal information, and protect people from inaccurate data. And so, happy to be join this discussion. Hopefully, this has sparked interest in all of you, and you'll have some questions for us. But it's really something that we should all care about, even if you aren't a community that is particularly susceptible to being surveilled by either by police at the local level or through surveillance technology, we should all care about the erosion of our civil rights and our civil liberties for all Americans. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakira. And we'll turn to our final speaker, Chinyere Tutashinda of the Center for Media Justice.
Hello, everyone. Oh, that is really loud. Okay. So I want us to start with a quote. So let me just start. So my name is Chinyere Tutashinda. I'm with the Center for Media Justice. And primarily, we work around at the conjunction of media, representation, rights, and technology, right? We run a network called the Media Action Grassroots Network, Magnet, of about 100 different grassroots organizations that really understand how media and technology kind of intersect in the different movements in which they are participating in, right? And we do this because we know that in order for our country to really shift and to change in the only way that it has is that it takes organizers on the ground and people on the ground to be able to feel comfortable to do that, right? And we know that in order for that to happen, that we have to shift culture. So that's a little bit of what we do. And what brings us then particularly to this conversation is because of our network and because of the work that we do, we've heard over the last, I would say 5 years or so, just continuous concerns around the ways in which organizers are being targeted and that communities are being really inhibited from doing any kind of organizing work. So we understand, again, just like some of the panelists have already stated, that surveillance, especially surveillance in communities of color, is not new, right? That there are new technologies, but in itself is not new. But what these new technologies can do is really scary. And from talking with people on the ground, they're very scared around it. So we work with groups big activists and organizers groups who've started a couple of years ago with telling us around their having issues with their phones and their phones dropping and being at protests and getting identified. And through those conversations and through other research, realized really the use of stingrays or IMSI catchers, big devices that can take and gather all of the cell phone information in a particular area and take that information, being able to get all of your text, all of your, just anything that's on your phone, they can get, right? And how that's being used and utilized against protest and against organizers. There are incidences of that happening in Baltimore. There have been times in which that has been utilized in Oakland. And then there's incidences of it in Chicago and in LA and across the country. So we were very lucky to be able to work with Color of Change, Open Technology Institute, and Georgetown to be able to file complaints against the FCC to really push to saying, wait, these devices are being used across the country, but there's absolutely no laws that's regulating them right now. Federally, they've now just this summer, a judge realized that you have to use a warrant, but on the local level, there's actually zero legislation that says that they have to either use a warrant or that they have to get some kind of permission on a state or local level. So really trying to push the FCC to say, these devices are using our airwaves, and they're using our airwaves in a way that actually is illegal and that violates all of our Fourth Amendment and being able to just take your information. And that's just one of the cases and one of the examples of the ways in which we know that the technology has really been used to kind of stifle organizing and stifle communities of color. The other way, and one of the campaigns that we're working on, is really thinking around electronic monitoring. So we know that there's a huge and really, really, really great push to decarcerate and to let people out of jails. And as this is happening, we're looking at our communities then becoming carceral cities, right? If people have electronic monitors and they're being surveyed on a day-to-day basis in and out of their communities without any real oversight, and looking at who gets the electronic monitor and who doesn't, and being able to really notice the really disproportionate impact that's having on communities of color. So these are just a few of the different campaigns in which we work on, and we really try to hear from our base, hear from the different organizations that we work with across the country, and what's affecting their communities, and have noticed just a disproportionate way in which now technology is really being used to survey us.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Chinyere. So now we have about 30 minutes for questions. Turn this off 1 second. Do we have questions from the audience about anything that's been discussed so far? Yes, ma'am. And if you could also identify yourself. Let me restate the question real quick. So the question is, what regulations are in place for police-worn body camera use and the use of the footage? And is it a reasonable ask to ask that local law enforcement disclose things like when the cameras are turned on and what is found in the footage? Harlan.
Thanks. That's a great question. So overall, the use of body-worn cameras is regulated by the police departments themselves. Departments have operating manuals and procedures and body-worn camera rules and regulations. For example, when officers must turn their cameras on, when they have to turn them off because of privacy reasons, how long footage is retained. That's all primarily guided by police departments' own guidelines. And oftentimes, they negotiate these operating procedures with the union. In some cases, they'll discuss with the public community and other outside stakeholders, but certainly not often enough. Over the past couple of years, there have been a number of state-level legislative efforts. Texas, Florida, and other jurisdictions have passed body-worn camera-specific rules. For the large part, those pieces of legislation have not helped the community from a civil rights perspective. You might have heard that in North Carolina, the bill categorized body-worn camera footage not as a public record, which took it outside the scope of what you could FOIA for, which I think leads to the second part of your question, which is, whether it's reasonable to ask departments to disclose information about how cameras are being used, and the answer is absolutely. What we've been able to evaluate so far have been the policies that departments have put into place and whether those rules and safeguards are good. And I think the next step in monitoring the impact that cameras are having on communities is really looking at, on an ongoing basis, how often cameras are being used. Here in DC, DC Council passed a reasonably good bill at the end of last year that does require DC MPD to publish a public report every 6 months about, how many hours of footage have been recorded, how many times officers have failed to record otherwise required incidents, number and the reasons why that's happened, and all sorts of other statistics that's really useful in gauging and monitoring how things are happening. But certainly that's not happening everywhere, and it's certainly not happening at a federal level. So, with working together with the Leadership Conference, we've been trying to push on getting more departments to report out to the public about how implementation is going. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, overall, I mean, I think this is a new mode of working for many police departments, right? Lots of police departments see the development of these operational procedures as an internal thing. And because body-worn cameras have been such a high-profile technology, the public has pressured police departments to be more open about that policy development process and to make that more democratic. We've been pushing with our body-worn camera scorecard, where we've evaluated 50 police departments. The first factor that we are evaluating departments on is whether or not they even make their body-worn camera policies public. And in a number of cities, major cities across the country, the policies themselves are not even public, which means that it's essentially impossible to have a conversation about what the rules of the road and what the safeguards are. They are, yeah. So I should have said that up front. Yes, it's at BWC Scorecard. That's body-worn camera. BWCScorecard.org, and you can find the whole report, and you can cross-compare a lot of the policies that are being implemented across the country.
Wonderful. Other questions? We have a question in the back. Yes, sir. And I'll make sure I repeat everyone's questions so that the folks who watch can understand. Please. So if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, is what people say. Professor Xi, what is your response?
Well, personally, I have assumed that my emails are accessible by anybody, so you don't say bad things. Whether you should care about this issue is a privacy issue. That's what the First Amendment caucus is about. And as I said, if there is agenda to catch you, and they will find something and pick bones out of an egg, and so that is an invasion of people's right.
If I could exercise moderator's prerogative here and just add to that a little bit, I would submit that if you look hard enough at anyone's record, at every tax return they've filed, every form they've filled out, you can find something on someone. You can find some place where they could have been clearer, they made a mistake, where they are in the wrong. But another way to look at this question is, this question is sort of like saying, well, if you're not a person of color, why should you care about racism, right? Even if you are a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout and you commit no wrong, in the eyes of the law, as it was at their time, who had something to hide? Civil rights activists, right? Who had something to hide? Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Cesar Chavez. And so all of these folks were pushing for things that in the states in which they lived were illegal, and that law enforcement and the government could legally surveil them for in many instances. And this totally sets aside the fact that all of these people were human beings, and so they had private lives. And because they were human beings, some of those people made mistakes. And so I think that's another way to answer that question. Sir.
If I may, it's a great point. When I was charged, I knew from the very first moment they were wrong, and I'm absolutely certain that I was innocent. However, we were very much concerned that they have all my tax return, they have all my emails, they have everything I have on my computer. So who knows what they will find? Maybe somewhere I spat and got a speeding something or something, and also they could say, okay, you have checked this box on these forms, and in fact it's not exactly the same as what happened. And they could do everything. I mean, that's what happened. That we talked about this, that a lot of cases did not go to the courts because, all the weight of the federal government are against you, and then they find something that you have to plead guilty to. And I know Jeremy Wu has been, collecting all these statistics about how many cases has been prosecuted against Chinese Americans. But if they found something that they charge you and you plead guilty, that's counted as a win for the federal government. And so that's a very, very important point.
Sakira, did you have something to add?
I would say that that's not really what our Constitution is based off of. I mean, just quite plainly. The notion that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, if that was, a principle upon which Americans valued, or, a value of American life, or it would be in our Constitution that way. But it's the exact opposite, right? Our Constitution actually specifically talks about the importance of privacy and keeping people safe from unreasonable intrusion, whether it's unreasonable searches and seizures, et cetera. But it's really to maintain the personal liberty and freedom of every individual is really what this country is founded upon. And so because of that, it's not about whether or not I have something to hide. It's about whether or not my personal privacy and my ability to live free in this country is a value that I hold dear and is a constitutional principle that we should uphold for everyone. And I think that's quite the best answer to give to anyone who thinks that it's okay to be intrusive of anyone if just because, they should have nothing to hide, right? There are some unreasonable expectations, right? I don't have an expectation of privacy in this room, but if I'm in certain places, I do. And so I think we all have to hold firm to those founding principles that our country purports to uphold. And as we start to let them be eroded, we start to unravel the fabric of our nation and what we really, truly believe in.
Terrific. I think we had a question from Jake, and then next question. Yes, sir. So first we'll go to Jake, and then we'll go to you, sir, after that.
Hi, Jake Bob from Constitution Project. I wanted to ask Carlin, you talked a little bit about the potential use of body cameras as a prosecutorial.
Do you want to summarize the question?
Yeah. The question that Jake raised is, how does body-worn camera footage when used in a courtroom, how does that change, and does that improve or not the status quo of the situation? I think one of the main concerns, one of the kind of the hotbed issue around body-worn camera policy right now is this issue around officer pre-report viewing. And this is an issue which is essentially, when officers are allowed to view footage of the incidents that have been recorded, whether officers need to first give an independent account of what he or she actually saw and perceived at the moment, or whether an officer is allowed to use body-worn camera footage during the process of writing that report, right? Police departments argue that this makes officer reports more accurate. But civil rights groups argue that this allows officers potentially to conform the reports just to what the footage shows, rather than providing a full and independent account of what the officers saw. And so in most departments across the country, unfortunately, and this is the uphill battle that we're currently fighting, is that officers do get this unfair advantage of watching footage before giving their initial statements. The effect of that is that it makes officer statements or officer interviews appear to be, and artificially, more accurate than other witness statements, right? Other witnesses don't have this advantage of reviewing the footage before giving a statement to investigators, right? Like, put yourself in the shoes of an investigator if you're trying to get to the heart of what happened in a particular incident. It's unlikely that you had a witness to an incident that you would go up to them and say, okay, I want to know what you saw, but before you tell me, why don't you watch the replay and then you tell me what you saw, right? That would taint the person's memory. And what you really want is an independent, an objective, or an independent perspective of what the officer saw. And so I think the introduction of body-worn cameras, especially as evidence in the courtroom, I think the way that it's being rolled out, especially with the allowance that officers be able to watch footage, I think skews the justice system even further against criminal defendants because it makes officer testimony look even more credible than it already is.
Terrific. Before we turn to your question, sir, I want to let my fellow panelists know that the final question I'm going to ask you in about 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes, is the following. If you could just in a sentence or two say one concrete thing that a staffer in this room could do or could have their boss do or say that would be useful to cut down on this disparate impact of surveillance. One thing. So think about that as we turn to your question, sir.
My name is Jeremy Wu, and I'm a retired federal worker. And I'd like to follow up on the question and answer to Professor Xi. His case has happened more than a year ago, and it has created tremendous concern from the Asian American community about the lack of response from the government. So from our perspective, it's not the question of what does Professor Xi have anything to hide, but with all the inquiries made by the Asian American Caucus, made by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and numerous petitions to the White House, to the Department of Justice, to the FBI, for an explanation, and tracing back to Sherry Chen, whom Professor Xi mentioned as part of the National Weather Service, who faced the same kind of experience going back to 2014. And yet, in the last 2 years, we have received no explanation from the government in any way as to what happened, what are the basic statistics. For example, FBI has reported that economic espionage conducted by China and Chinese are the second highest priority for the FBI behind terrorism. And yet there's no statistics, no transparency, no openness and about what the government side's explanation is. So this is a question as well as a comment, and that is, as we question the openness or the integrity of the individuals involved, what about the government side?
Mm-hmm. So if I may summarize, what can explain this this non-response to questions from prominent elected officials and other civil society stakeholders to the misuse and abuse of government authority that we've seen in Professor Xi's case and in other cases? Who would like to speak to this? Sakira? Me. Sure. I think you have two problems that are much bigger than the immediate question we're dealing with here. The first is that law enforcement already has, so there is a legitimate aspect of some law enforcement that should be secret, right? You don't want a bank robber to be able to call up the police and say, hey, are you investigating any bank robberies today, right? But what you see when you transfer that into action is that opacity is much greater than it should be, right? We keep far more secrets than we need to. Suddenly you move from the law enforcement context to the intelligence context. and the national security context. And there, the secrecy is it's like a building that is nuclear proof, right? That has 6 foot, 7 foot concrete walls. And what we saw during, right after Edward Snowden is that many elected officials in the House and in the Senate lacked staff with the appropriate clearance, which is TSSCI clearance, to actually access these documents and tell their bosses in a classified protected setting with those 6 foot walls what was going on. And the fact of the matter is, if any of you, if I know many of you are staffers sitting here in the room, you know how many things your boss thinks about in one day, right? In the morning it could be ag subsidies, then it's a meeting about foreign relations, and then it's a meeting about abortion and choice, and then it's a meeting, and so if there is staff that can't even look into these questions, there's little hope that the elected officials will be able to fully comprehend what's going on. And frequently, the secrets are even kept from the elected officials. And we saw that in the House with various reauthorizations of the Patriot Act. So you have that issue. And then you have the simple issue of underrepresentation, right? In the House is much more diverse than the Senate. But neither reflects the proportion of the population which it represents. The Senate has, I think, 23 women and maybe 22. And there was a big celebration because there was one more, female office holder in the Senate. African American senators, I think there are 3, right? And so you're talking about 12, 13% of the population, 3 senators out of 100. And so the fact of the matter is that we have a long way in ensuring that that diverse communities' voices are heard. So that would be my reaction to that. I don't know if others want to add to it.
I mean, I think that we have a long there's documented and a long documented history of law enforcement in this country, and in particular, I would just say the FBI and the CIA and others, sort of operating outside the bounds of what we would all deem appropriate and reasonable for law enforcement officials to do in their normal jobs. And so unless there's more transparency and more accountability in that lawmakers have the ability to influence what the FBI can and cannot do with regards to its police powers, and that there are folks in the Department of Justice, maybe the Civil Rights Division or the Office of Inspector General, that have some more authority to have oversight over the FBI. I think you'll continue to see this problem of of things happening and there's no accountability for these types of incidences occurring. So legislation is always a useful way for lawmakers to flex their authority over government agencies. And so I think that's one tool that lawmakers here can do. Hearings are always a useful thing for them to do, is to invite oversight hearings of the FBI, to invite the director in to talk about some of these issues and to get more information, so the public is more aware of these things. And I feel like I'm going into your last question for all of us, but I would say that is sort of where we are, and to remain vigilant and active. I mean, we are consistently challenging the FBI, having meetings with them to talk about these issues and to ensure that the rights of all Americans are being upheld and people are not being surveilled and prosecuted unwarrantedly.
Terrific. Why don't we take one last question from the audience, and then we'll have a last question from panelists. Yes, Sean. how is the disparate impact of government surveillance changing behavior on the ground?
Thank you. So I've seen a lot of people, especially in the last couple of years, really thinking around security, right? Like, what does that mean in a different way? And digital security in particular. And then there's been a significant upturn of that in the last 3 weeks with thinking about our current governmental shift that's about to happen. So I think digital security is big. And what I mean by that is being able to have secure communications through your phone. There are various apps for that that people are downloading and being able to use, looking at and utilizing encrypted emails, so that there are different ways in which the government then can't be able to get your email information. There are services there are either providers that encrypt the emails themselves, which is a little less secure, but way more secure than Google. And then there are also ways in which you can use a different service that's offline to be able to encrypt it before sending. And so there are communities around the country that are really actively going into security mode. And how do we protect ourselves from the various surveillance tools that are being utilized? Some of the things that I teach and I train outside of my work with CMJ is around like direct action and direct action techniques and stuff. And some of the things that we're telling people is like, leave your phone. So if you're going to actions, if you're going to protest, like get an old school camera and be able to take pictures that way, or have a phone that's different so that if you need to tweet or doing some kind of social media documentation, you've cleared it out, you've erased everything, just back it up so that you can go out. So there's different ways in which people are starting to really, and organizers in particular, are really looking at the various ways in which we can just protect ourselves. So there's less information for the government to be able to get, and if they do, that it's just harder for you to have.
Terrific. We will now turn to our final question, but before I do, I want to point to a few online resources for each of our speakers. Sakira mentioned the civil rights principles for the era of big data. If you Google civil rights principles for the era of big data, you will get a simple sheet that tells you what they are. For Harlan, and also actually for Sakira, bwcscorecard.org, body-worn camera scorecard, bwcscorecard.org, will see a wonderful grading, basically, of body-worn camera policies from around the nation, from local police jurisdictions around the nation. I urge you to read about Professor Xi's story. If you Google his name and the New York Times, you'll see a very moving account of what he has had to go through and as a result of his false accusation and the false charges brought against him. I would urge you to read the Center for Media Justice's complaint filed against the FCC for the use of stingrays to disproportionately target communities of color. So if you Google Center for Media Justice FCC complaint, Washington Post, you will see a story about that and a link to that. And for our report, it's perpetuallineup.org, www.perpetuallineup.org. So last question, a sentence or two on what concrete things the House staffers in the room could do to affect change. I will quickly go myself. You have the power of the purse. You could condition funding for federal and state face recognition programs on tests for accuracy or bias, or on public posting and legislative approval of face recognition policies. Those are described in our report. Chinyere.
So we have 2 letters that are circulating, one in the House and one in the Senate, in support of our complaint. For more information around that, please contact me if you think that the person that you work for would be willing to sign on to add extra pressure to the FCC. So that's the number one thing that you can do today that could help around stingrays. And then the other one is really understanding, again, the power of the purse, putting conditions on federal dollars that are going to police departments across the countries for more transparency and accountability with the technologies that they're implementing.
Professor Xi.
I hope your boss will understand that racial profiling in the justice system hurt everybody, including the people that your boss represent. And I think what you could do, if you can, for example, make it happen for a hearing of the people in the Justice Department about whether there is a racial profiling practice, and that will be a great service to every ethnic group or every minority groups in the United States.
Thank you so much, Harlan.
Continuing on the earlier theme of power of the purse, attach strings to federal funding to expand body-worn camera programs and to ensure that grantees are following best practices to help actually provide transparency and protect civil rights.
Sakira.
So I have one legislative and two administrative. So the legislative thing that your bosses could do, if they aren't already supporting the End Racial Profiling Act, you can add them to that bill and help to get it passed. It's been languishing in Congress for the last 14 years, which is why these things continue to happen, because we haven't acted on prohibiting them affirmatively. And then number two, you can have, the ACLU and the Leadership Conference send a letter to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division around facial recognition, but the letter specifically talks about all surveillance, the use of all surveillance, and we ask civil rights to expand ongoing investigations of police practices and include in future investigations of those practices an examination of whether the use of surveillance technology, including facial recognition, but also body cameras and others, has a disparate impact on communities of color. And then two, asks the FBI to examine its use of facial recognition technologies and other types of surveillance technologies for a disparate impact on communities of color. So you can I will send that letter, or we can make sure you get a copy of the letter, but your boss can send a similar type of letter to inquire about the use of these technologies and how it's impacting communities of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakira. If you could join me in thanking our speakers, particularly Professor Xi and the Fourth Amendment Caucus. Have a wonderful day. Sean, anything before we close?